So welcome everyone to our fourth and final panel for this year's Religion and Ecology Summit, hosted by the Ecology, Spirituality and Religion program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. My name is Chantel Noah Forbes, and I serve as adjunct faculty in the Ecology, Spirituality and Religion program at CIS. And our university building is found on Mission Street in San Francisco, and it occupies traditional unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. I join you today virtually from the traditional lands and waterways of the Monacan Indian Nation in Charlottesville, Virginia. This afternoon's panel on rivers and the rights of nature speaks to our conference theme of ecological reverence, renewal, and responsibility for water in a multitude of ways. The Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights describes the rights of nature movement as the recognition and protection of legal rights of nature, including rights of ecosystems and species, promoting rights of nature laws, policies, and court decisions to recognize nature as a living entity with existing legal frameworks. Further, these rights institute mechanisms for people and governments to implement, enforce, and defend these rights on behalf of and in the name of nature. Including rights of nature into Western and tribal legal frameworks on this continent has been evolving since the 1970s, with Ecuador's landmark constitutional ruling in 2008 creating worldwide awareness for the movement. For Indigenous and many place-based cultures worldwide, recognizing the rights of nature is consistent with pre-colonial and contemporary traditions of respecting all beings and all of Mother Earth, who gives these beings life. In this worldview, as Dr. Cavalier has shared, rivers are not mere bodies of water, but kinfolk. This panel will take the form of a dynamic conversation between panelists, where we will specifically explore the rights of rivers within the context of the United States, also known as Turtle Island. And to quote co-founder of the San Francisco-based Movement Rights, Shannon Biggs, I think if we're looking at where we are on this journey for the United States in recognizing rights of nature, we look back at past movements for rights, whether we're talking about slavery, civil rights, women's rights, those rights always already existed. And so what we're doing here is asking the law to catch up to what is real and what is right and what is ethical and what is just. Our discussion today is not only significant because April 22 marks Earth Day, but also because this week marks the 24th session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, to which Earth defenders from across the globe, including some of our panelists, have gathered to speak on behalf of their human and more than human communities. Our panel today includes Chief Anne Richardson of the Rappahannock Tribe in Virginia, Frank Bibeau of the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe, who is legal counsel and director for the Tribal Rights of Nature program at the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights, Dr. Crystal Cavalier of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation and co-founder of 7 Directions of Service in North Carolina, and lastly, but not least, Ms. Talia Landry of the Mashpee Wampanoag in Massachusetts. And Talia has served in various capacities for her tribe, including serving as the tribe's education department and environmental mentorship and training programs. And Talia has recently taken on the position of Tribal Council Secretary. So in the order that I've just shared, each panelist will take 10 or so minutes to introduce themselves more fully and explain their relationship to today's theme of rivers and the rights of nature. After this, I will guide the panel to address a series of questions prepared for them broadly. So now I would like to welcome Chief Anne to the screen to begin our panel. Welcome, Chief Anne. I think you're still muted.
Okay, there I am. Hello, everyone. My name is Chief Anne Richardson, and I'm from Rappahannock Tribe here in Virginia. I'm one of the 7 Powhatan tribes that are here in the state of Virginia, and we just recently got recognition in 2018 as a federally recognized tribe, but have been here since about 10,000 years prior to 1607, when the English came and divested us of our lands and our occupation on the rivers. And we are now returning to that place of our ancestors. And so we're really excited and honored to be on that land again with our ancestors and be able to hold ceremony there and fight to protect our river and our lands again. Last year, we just instituted in our tribal constitution the rights of the river, the Rappahannock River, and we are now developing codes that are going to undergird that for our tribal court. So we're excited to do that. We've been threatened by water withdrawal for data centers. So Virginia has more data centers than any other place on the planet right now. And so we're really fighting water withdrawal for that, among other things, other forms of development. The property that we just acquired, 969 acres, was slated and approved for a housing development, a resort, a golf course, the same old, yada, yada, yada. And so we were able to get it out of bankruptcy court through a partner and purchase it for $8.1 million and restore it back to the tribe. So that just happened on Tuesday of this week. So we're excited to be a part of this movement. And I feel like if the indigenous people of the earth don't rise up to do this and teach others how to do it, it will be destruction for us all.
Thank you, Chief Anne. And I see Frank has just arrived. I'll just give him a moment to come on screen. Welcome, Frank. We just, thank you for joining us. We just began the panel, and I just shared that I'm going to ask each panelist to sort of introduce themselves more fully and their relationship to this topic. And then once we've done that, we'll sort of engage in a conversation around the questions.
I saw the outline.
Great. So you're welcome to introduce yourself.
What? You mean everybody else did their 15 minutes? What happened?
No, you're second on the list.
I'm second on the list. Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, and thanks for inviting me. My name is Frank Bibeau, and I work with Rights of Nature and the Center for Environmental and Democratic Rights, CEDAR. And I guess I'm here for a couple of different reasons. Question number 3, I think, is the most important part, talking about the future, about, I don't have the question in front of me because I just got out of the vehicle here just a couple minutes ago. But it talks about what we've been doing and our approach or our role. And so I'm an attorney. I've lived most of my life on the Leech Lake Reservation, and I've worked for the Leech Lake Reservation. I worked for White Earth Reservation, worked in a lot of tribal courts. So I have an understanding of how those mechanisms work. They aren't that different in terms of procedure and law, but the customs and other kinds of I guess rights that we would have aren't always as understood and maybe not used as effectively in the past as maybe they could be. And so with rights of nature, I worked with rights of monoman, which is wild rice. And ultimately what happened was monoman, the plant, sued the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources in tribal court using that tribal law. And while that approach worked for a while, ultimately the Tribal Court of Appeals decided that we didn't have that jurisdiction. Now that's not a bad thing. We learned a lot of good things. And when I went to federal court, because the DNR didn't like what was going on with us suing them in tribal court, the federal court, basically the DNR said, you know, please ask these Indians to not use their tribal law in their tribal court against us because we have sovereignty. And the judge said, can you point to any law that gives me the right to tell them that? And there isn't any law like that. It's a matter of how you present your tribal custom or law and how you use it in tribal court. And a lot of this rights of nature, these concepts with relationships with natural resources are because we're connected to everything. They're our relatives. And so it makes defense of your family a lot different approach, I think, than a lot of the mainstream approaches. And so having said that, I would say the good part was within about 6 months, not 6 months, 6 weeks of monoman, the wild rice, suing the DNR, a friend of mine in Washington State, another tribal attorney for the Sauk Seattle tribe, he filed litigation on behalf of the salmon versus the City of Seattle Power and Light Company. And they have 3 water controlled dams along the Skagit River that prevent fish passage, salmon primarily. And they were in a FERC renewal process, FERC being the Federal Energy Resource Commission. And that being federal and the tribe, the Sauk Seattle, being federally recognized, the state basically, or the city, I should say, the City of Seattle, had to acquiesce to the consent of the tribe that they hadn't gotten before, and so they had to acquiesce to the fish passageways. So in what I would call a short period of time, just because of the FERC process and other things, maybe 6 months, when that litigation started, it became a settlement to where the salmon have an opportunity to come back upstream and have these fish passageways put in. And that allowed the use of nature, natural law, the rights of salmon, the rights of the tribal members who have a treaty right specifically to the salmon, coming to where they relocated to their reservation. All of those played an important role. And that one also was, because it was settled out, that's what you're trying to get to. It restored a different balance of nature and also with tribal treaty rights versus state and federal law. So I think there's an interesting tool with rights of nature. I know that different tribal groups have used different, I guess we'll just call it creatures at this point. The next phase I'm looking to work on would be rights of fish. The rights of monoman and the rights of fish, the rights of salmon that the Sauk Seattle used, these are all water protection strategies. It's just different ways of trying to protect water for everybody and for everything. Was that 15 minutes?
It was not, But that was a great introduction to the topic. Thank you so much, Frank.
Okay.
And I'll ask Crystal to introduce herself and share next.
Mekudamin Ching Kyohei Nahampi Pise Mima Crystal Mima Occaneechi Watiwa. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here, and I'm excited to talk to everybody. So my name is Dr. Crystal Cavalier Keck, and I am a citizen of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation and a co-founder of 7 Directions of Service. It is an Indigenous-led nonprofit rooted in biocultural restoration, land defense, and climate justice. Our current territory is around Clarksville, Virginia, but it extends down to the Eno, the Haw, and the Dan Rivers. And one of the areas that we focus on is the rights of nature. And, I'm pretty sure Frank, he just did a great job of explaining what the rights of nature was. But, we want to give this idea that rivers and mountains and ecosystems are not property, but living relatives. And living here in the South, you really have to really work hard on that because we were colonized for so long ago. But these relatives have the right to exist and flourish and evolve and be free from harm. And I really want to thank Ms. Donna Chavis for introducing me to this term back in 2018 when I moved home from DC. But then, from there to here, I worked for the Native Organizers Alliance, and that allowed me to go on the Red Road to DC, where we took a totem pole to many different nations across the United States, and we got to stop at different tribal nations. And I learned more about the rights of the salmon from the Nimipu. And then we went to Menominee with Guy Ryder. He was really working on the rights of nature. And then we met with Faith Spotted Eagle in the Missouri River, talking about Fort Randall and the dam that was put there. So I thought this was real important to bring this back because we were fighting against the Mountain Valley Pipeline Southgate extension. And so, I brought it home and I started to work with many lawyers to try to, talk about this because in the state of North Carolina, many people view this as very linear, but it's not. It's very circular. That is just how we work. And, as Indigenous people, this is not a new concept. It's an old memory and we have to revive that. It's always how our ancestors have always related to the natural world. The difference now is that we're working to restore these relationships in both law and practice so that our future generations have something left to inherit and really defend. So for about a couple of years, we started working with just talking about this idea in our community. And in 2023, I helped introduce North Carolina House Bill 795, which was rights of the Haw River. And then in 2024, I introduced House Bill 923, which was rights of the Dan, because those 2 rivers were being impacted by the Mountain Valley Pipeline Southgate. And this legislation is the first of its kind in our state. But this year, we've been working on it, trying to, make it a little bit better. This year, we combined those 2 bills and introduced House Bill 345. So rights of the Haw River and the Dan River combined in one. And right now we are in a campaign phase of educating people about this. We are planting seeds all across the state of North Carolina, reintroducing it, trying to get people to understand that they are really part of nature. We're doing healing gatherings. We're doing a lot of public advocacy. Like I mentioned, we just founded a 501c4 to help us advocate and just really help our tribal communities remember that these waters, these forests, these lands, they're more than backdrops. They are our relatives. And again, Chief Anne is really influential, or, she was really profound when they did the rights of that river in her territory, because most of our relatives have forgotten their connection to the land and to the water. And, you know, colonization really just didn't steal our territory, it fractured our memory. And many of us were pushed into this survival mode for so long that the sacredness of place became a story told in pieces. But our connection to the land is, you know, again, it's not linear, it's layered, circular, and ceremonial. It's something you feel in your bones, not just read in a textbook. And it's something that we're reclaiming through rites of nature. Last year, we hosted the Yesa Tribunal, which brought together tribal leaders, legal experts, and community members to speak truth about environmental violence and uplift legal standing of our ecosystems. That gathering affirmed what we already know, right? Our story, our rights are tied to the rights of the land. And, you know, again, we've been fighting extraction against the Mountain Valley Pipeline and now Transco Williams Southeast Enhancement Supply Project. Most of our communities have been woman-led, you know, not through just domination, but through relationship. And so by tending to the roots, not just the fruits, our grandmothers didn't ask for permission to protect life. They just did it. And so I really wanted to carry that forward with that same responsibility now in face of this climate chaos and cultural erasure and corporate exploitation. So I'm really honored that we're doing this on Earth Day because this is huge. You know, I want all of us to remember that it's not it's not always flashy and it's not always loud, but it is always sacred. Because the planet doesn't really need saving. It needs to be remembered. And women, especially Indigenous women, are doing that. And you know, I was looking at Talia and how she was helping the youth understand about the rights of their sacred fish, which really led me to work about the rights of the sturgeon here in North Carolina because we have a lot of dams that keep that fish from swimming upstream. So we're working on the rights of the sturgeon and how to defend that sacred fish to our tribe, as well as the rights of the red wolf, which is a wolf that is indigenous to the Southeast. And, you know, a lot of people mistake them for coyotes, but we really have to learn how to live in a way that ensures that ancestors will be here after us. And so I don't know if that's been 7 minutes, Chantel, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I just really hope people understood what I was this point I was trying to get across. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Crystal, so much. Your work is really inspiring, and I'll definitely ask you more questions as we go along. So now I'd like to turn it over to Talia Landry.
Thank you so much. And hate to back Crystal up, but you know, I mean, that's what I'm here to do. So, Winnikisak, everybody, Natasumi Talia Landry, Nuto Mas Mashpee Ka Mashpee Wampanoag. So my name is Talia Landry. My blood and bones are from the place of Mashpee, and I come from the Mashpee Wampanoag Nation. We are a first contact people. So we are the natives that are in the storybooks about the ones that have met the Mayflower and the Pilgrims upon their arrival. So we're not too far down from Plymouth. Wampanoag is a nation, and Mashpee is one tribe of that nation. We started with 69, and now we're down to about 3. A lot of our nation was swept by yellow fever and different illnesses before the Mayflower came. So when the Mayflower did come, they did land upon Plymouth, which actually was like a burial site for our people because that village was decimated by disease. So upon their arrival, you know, when they set up shop in one of our burial sites, our people kind of took notice and really did was a big factor within aiding, you know, our visitors, because we didn't understand why there was women and children and men taking village up on a burial site. So that's just a little bit of context as far as the geographic location and as far as our nation within being first contact people. We're one of the most documented within the nation because we were within that contact. The first Bible that was published and printed in America was printed in Wampanoag. So it just kind of shows where we are within that spectrum. We actually weren't federally recognized until 2007. We just received land and trust in 2015, which it was challenged and actually just got reaffirmed within 2021. So our land battles and our recognition battles have been part of the long haul. They decimated us within civilization by forcing us into citizenship against our will after we voted against it twice in 1820. So that's kind of how we got pushed within the civilization and colonization of that, because we were protected for some time as development in Cape Cod, we'll say, was being kind of decimated around us. We were protected in our own, what they called a plantation at a time, kind of kept on going. Plantation, village, reservation, all those terms we saw through the years. So that's just a little background of where my people are from. We are coastal people, so 70% of our diet comes from the ocean. They actually, within their census during the Indian Removal Act, they declared that they were unable to move us off of our homelands because we relied so much on our diet relied so much on the sea. So they basically their conclusion was if we move these people, they would cease to exist. And at that time, this was, when the government was kind of trying to play, reorganizing rather than genocide. But we kind of all know what the real reason was behind that. So within that, I am newly elected, as mentioned before, as Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Council Secretary. So that is a new political position, but I've always been most of my work is within the community sense. I'm a youth worker. I do a lot of cultural programmings within the youth. We call ourselves within our community culture keepers. So we enable or take on the task of learning different traditional skills and perpetuating that within our younger generations. So a lot of my focus is within working with our youth and within that cultural revitalization to kind of combat, our high death rates and within this climate crisis as well. So I am a youth advisor to the Mashpee Wampanoag Native Environmental Ambassadors, which is a youth group that we formed about 2 years ago. And our main initiative is to create rights of nature legislation to present and hopefully be passed through the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Sovereign Nation. So our first campaign is the rights of herring, which is a very small fish that is very near and dear to our hearts. And they have a lot of cultural significance as well as just everyday significance of how we use our herring. We learned about rights of nature about a year before we decided to do the rights of herring. So we'll say the concept of rights of nature, because obviously rights of nature is an Indigenous value. It's more just a Western translation of that value. So with that being said, we had a kind of a fellowship that started this youth group. I shouldn't say it started a youth group. It started this education of what rights of nature was. So within that, our youth really saw the effects and the importance in what we were doing to combat the climate crisis and using this creative solution in order to do it. So they took it upon themselves to say, even though the fellowship is done and we got educated on what rights of nature is, there's a lot more work to be done. So we want to actually form ourselves as an official group so we could keep on doing this for future generations to come. And so we can pass it down on to the younger generations. So they decided to create the Mashpee Wampanoag Native Environmental Ambassadors. And as I mentioned, we decided to start with one species, the herring, because they are so significantly important to us. And because, embodying that right within that fish, we're able to protect everything around it. So including, all of their ecosystem that they live and thrive in. So it was a way for us to introduce the concept not only to the non-Native community that really need to buy into what rights of nature is, but also our community. Obviously the Western legal system has never really been in our favor and has been used against us. So when we've introduced the concept of, rights of herring to our, older generations, they were a bit hesitant because they weren't really sure what it entailed. We obviously don't know how far we can even push it because it is pushing our sovereignty in a sense and how much we'll be able to actually achieve with it. But with them, when you talk about law and the constant kind of battle that we're always facing until this day is, you know, that the law and people and civilization always impeding on our Aboriginal rights. So they were a bit hesitant on putting laws into place that were pertaining of our natural relatives. So it took a bit of education for them to be able to come around to the idea. Once they fully understand what rights of nature was and what that actual document looked like, they were a lot more receptive and they worked with us. So the youth group started with a resolution, a Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Council resolution that declared a state of emergency for the herring. So within that, in that resolution was presented and unanimously passed by Tribal Council. So what that did was it obligated Tribal Council to put resources and attention to establishing the rights of herring. And within that resolution, we also stated that the Tribal Council would use their authority in lobbying to push with our law, the rights of herring, when it was established, to the state in order to develop a compact so they recognize our authority over the herring. So within our law that we drafted, we do name ourselves as the sole legal guardian of the herring within our ancestral homelands. So not the boundaries of that what they put within Massachusetts, but we are very descriptive as far as going all the way up to the southeast Rhode Island to Midwest of Massachusetts, where we abut Nipmuc territory. So we're very specific on our ancestral homelands and to be able to really spread our authority, I guess, and just proclaiming we have always been the natural stewards of this land for over 12,000 years. The fish don't have the ability to speak, but we do. We possess the voice, so we will use our voice to advocate and protect these herring as their sole legal guardian. So that is our method in trying to protect this sacred fish. And a little back steps on why we chose the herring. As I mentioned, we wanted it to be a little more focused so it was easy to digest. But to us, herring are very, very important, and they might be the smallest fish that we might see, but they signify the new year for us. So when the herring come up this stream and into our ponds to spawn, it signals us for our new year. So it's the time to start getting our gardens ready. It's the time that the new life is coming about. We use those little fish to bait our bigger fish. So once the scouts come up the river and they're there to spawn, then we know it's time to start harvesting those fish and getting those bigger fish to feed our families. And we also feed our families with the herring by smoking, frying them, pickling them, any sort of way that we can eat them. We use them for fertilizer within our gardens, and we also just honor them within song and dance. So it's a very important an important natural relative within our cultural history and within us as Wampanoag people. So, and we really chose to I don't want to say use the youth, but do this with the youth because as Crystal was saying, it's really a cultural revitalization sense too. So we're bringing the youth with our elders and our culture keepers that know the stories of how we used our herring or how the herring used to run so freely and so much in the river that it ran black that we could walk on their backs. So those stories is connecting our youth to who we are as Wampanoag people. And within that, it's inspiring them to really make these motions to, push and advocate on behalf of the fish because they want that. And when they're hearing that from their uncle, they're not just hearing a story or they're not watching a movie. Like they physically feel that within their DNA. They feel the loss of something. So that's kind of what has brought us closer together and unified us within a nation a little bit more along these past few years and really getting our kids back out with Mother Nature and to really get us back to that sense of gratitude and within cultural revitalization and combating colonization as well as the climate crisis. So they've successfully, like I mentioned, we've successfully passed the state of emergency, which is a Tribal Council resolution. We've drafted the herring ordinance. And so now it's really just in kind of those stagnant stages where going through the motions of being in the lawyer's hands and then having 30 days of posting and then having a hearing. So it's kind of within the political, process as it is now. But that has also been a challenge because what a lot of Indigenous communities know is that our jurisdiction is it's complicated, and the U.S. federal government doesn't really want any sovereign nation to be truly sovereign within their nation. So they did limit us within our capabilities of being able to have jurisdiction over non-tribal members or non-natives in general, as well as geographically. So we're trying to push our sovereignty a bit within this, and putting in things that we might not necessarily have the actual jurisdiction to do, but nowhere does it say that we don't have the ability to do it. Like, they can't stop us from doing it. Can we enforce it and make them, like, say, pay fines? Probably not, but this is our youth trying to take a stance as those future leaders and really put down what they believe in and push what they believe in. So by the time that they are those leaders and sitting in those seats, they're making those right decisions. And this is already kind of the education and the movement of how to protect, our natural relatives and to live in that way is really within that foundation work. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Talia. And I really appreciate that, all the context that you provided us with, and also you raised a lot of questions here in our discussion. And so I'm going to start with question 1, and I'm going to go off some of the things that Talia said, because I think they're really important. And for the first question, I'd really like if Frank and Chief Anne can respond to this question, and I'll ask Frank for you to please respond first. So the first question seems redundant, right? What are the rights of nature, and what factors continue to drive these rights' emergence as cultural and legal frameworks? And what I really want to ask you here is, can you explain what the rights of nature are from a Western legal framework, and then how that either can at times conflict with Indigenous legal frameworks or worldviews, or support, right? Because I have had students come up to me and say, well, are the rights of nature always appropriate within an Indigenous legal framework, right? Within Indigenous constitutions? And the question arises from the fact that we're still working from the basis of a Western legal framework that is based on property law. So there's an inherent conflict. So perhaps you can elaborate on this for the audience in a way that explains why, in the given sort of climate where we are governed by Western property law, people are still choosing to use this framework, even if it's not perfect.
Okay, unmute. Thank you. Don't mind me, I'm just struggling with my phone instead of my computer because I just got back from being away for a couple of weeks. So the Western part, like you said, is property. And I look at it more from the religious side of the Western, which is dominion over property, dominion over the earth, and that it's not just property, but it's property that you can misuse. It's property that you can destroy, and it's property that you can deprive others of access to. Is the concept? It's a dominion. It might be a capitalistic kind of a concept. Yeah, my phone keeps slipping around. It needs a charge at the same time. So that would be the part that I would talk about with the conflict of how wild rice in particular, being maybe the most important central part of our culture and what we do throughout our year and our seasons, with regard to harvesting wild rice, storing wild rice, the places that it plays in our community and the ceremonies and things. So one of the things that I talk about from time to time, and I think the panelists are well aware of it, but we'll talk about it for the benefit of everybody else. And this is a little blend of what I hear from different people. But humans arrived last on the planet. We, in a 24-hour clock of time on Earth, we arrive at like 23:55 at night, or maybe 23:59 and 30 seconds, and the day is almost done, and we are the last to arrive. And we don't really think of it that way. And in that last to arrive, when we came, according to our creation stories, when we came, we were just spiritual beings who wanted to have corporal beings, become corporal beings, and exist with the nature that we saw. And we made a petition with the Creator to be able to come and live and essentially exploit, I suppose, all of nature. And in that relationship, the creatures and everybody agreed that we could do that, but we always had to remember them and remember that we're all related. And so in that concept, we have a different way of looking at this as all gifts from the Creator, not property. But at the same time, under the legal system, they look at the rights to hunt, fish, and gather as what they call usufructuary property rights. And so those are the tools that we're really using, are those rights to hunt, fish, and gather. And in a sense, to go one step past that, as was just discussed, to protect all of those resources in perpetuity for not only ourselves as tribal members, but for everybody else, because we know everybody else needs and wants that same thing. And so we're in that conflict between, when we talk to our relations in the beginning of what we're doing, to go from gifts from the Creator to call them usufructuary property rights, makes it sound like we're almost making the same kind of argument when you use the word property. But in actuality, as an attorney and as the way our Constitution works, the U.S. Constitution protects property and it provides for due process. And so you can't just take away our rights to hunt, fish, and gather without due process. And that due process in particular has to occur at Congress. And Congress has to create some kind of legislation and adopt it and pass it and go through the process. And they're not always very fast and good at that. And so a lot of our rights, I think, have lasted for a long time in various ways and have come back in various ways because they recognize them as not just ancient rights or ancient law, but the rights of everyone. And the young people who I listen to talk about the rights to the rights to clean air, the rights to clean water, the new civil rights that have to be announced and protected because they don't exist. And so while nature is given personhood, in the legal sense, the Western law of property law, like a corporation, we're not giving nature anything. We're fulfilling our obligations under our first arrangement with the Creator.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for explaining and sharing that. And so the rights of nature here is a tool, right? A mechanism, a means to an end, in a sense. And I'd like to ask Chief Anne then to respond to why the Rappahannock Tribe decided to make use of this tool in their case, and how they believe it will assist them in fulfilling their obligations to the ecosystem of the river.
Well, thank you for that. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with my phone here. So, Frank, you did a good job with that, and we do have an obligation to take care of those things that are important to the survival of mankind. And in our treaties, and you talk about the legal constructs that we have that help us to stand upon those rights of natures. Yes, they are indigenous rights. From our treaties were with England prior to the establishment of the United States. We're also a first contact tribe. And our last treaty was in 1677. And in those treaties, we have the right to gather and to hunt and to fish. And we have to use the rights of nature to protect those rights, because if you can't fish because of all of the development and pollution and everything that's happened, if you can't gather for those same reasons, then that's a problem. And so in an effort now as you say, the new civil rights, is to be able to have clean water to drink and breathe fresh air that's clean. That's really the premise for the work that we're doing for the next 7 generations of people. And so it's very important to us, and also to uphold the treaties that were made, that were pre-contact or pre-colonial treaties with these foreign governments for these first contact tribes. These are, the herring also, Talia, is a big part of our culture. And the coming of the herring in the spring was like the beginning also of our year. And it was a time of celebration, a time when the whole community came out. The men went out to gather the fish, and the women came in to gather to clean the fish and to prepare them for all the various families for the winter. And so it was a time of celebration. There was a ceremony around it. We can hardly find them now, and we have people that are, our environmental department are tagging them and tracking them, and they go all the way up into Canada, some of them, and come back down. But not to be able to have them to run, we called it the runs because that's what they did, the heron runs, not to have that anymore is difficult for our community. And for this next generation, for Talia, you and Crystal's generation of young people, they don't even understand what that's about. And so part of this Return to the River is a program that teaches them all about that. And I would love to have you gals come and talk about it.
Thank you so much for that, Chief Anne. And both yourself and Frank spoke about the new civil rights. And so that leads me into the next question. And I'm going to follow that up with a counter question from the audience. But Crystal, I'd really like you to please speak to this question of, are the rights of nature also human rights within the context of this new civil rights? Because I feel like a lot of the work that you're doing in North Carolina, which is being led by and from the perspective of your Indigenous community, but extends to the broader community, right, of North Carolina, addressing everyone's human rights to clean air and clean water. So perhaps if you can speak to that process.
So, yes, that's a great question. And I did see that. So I do think that the rights of nature are a new kind of civil rights, and they are human rights. The rights of nature are an evolution of both civil rights and human rights. They emerge from recognition that human beings are not separate from nature, right? And therefore, the rights of ecosystems are directly tied to the health, the safety, the culture, and the survival of people, not just Indigenous people, but all people, right? And especially on our frontline communities where you see a lot of land development now. You see developers pulling lands out of trust. You see a lot of shoreline development. So these are our frontline communities. And so why are they human rights, right? Again, environmental health is a human right. If a river is poisoned, the people who depend on that river, they are harmed. If the air is unbreathable because of compressor stations or medical waste incineries, if that is unbreathable, freedom is meaningless, right? Like, if we really have to talk about this. And the right to nature's health is bound up in our right to live, thrive, and pass on culture. Like Chief Anne was saying, for our next 7 generations, Indigenous rights and land rights are inseparable. Indigenous, like my people, we see rivers, mountains, and forests as relatives, right? Like, that is a relative. It has a living spirit, and when relatives are destroyed, it violates our sacred responsibilities and cultural survival. So when people, I mean, I'm telling you, it is a responsibility for us to take on that. And you know, a little bit more than that, these are ancestral and intergenerational. And again, I know climate justice is a huge, you know, topic, but that's a social justice, right? The same systems that denied civil rights also are commodifying the earth, they're commodifying the water. Colonialism and white supremacy and extractive capitalism have all worked together to harm both people and planet. And so it is really necessary that we have these responsibilities of nature. You know, that is an act of repair. And you know, when you talk about the civil rights movement, this is now perfect in this administration that we're living in. It's just kind of the next, you know, wave, you know, to complete that circle, because what good is freedom if your land is stolen, your water is poisoned, and your future is burned? Like, this is a movement that we're going to have to bring together all of these justices to be able to fight together for human rights, environmental rights, indigenous sovereignty, because these things were just never meant to be separated. Um, and so, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I want to give Talia a moment to speak too, but I want to kind of add the flipped question, Talia, perhaps for you, which is Ashley Rooney asks, from your perspective, are there scenarios in which the rights of humans and the rights of other beings conflict? If so, do you think, how would you reconcile this? In other words, Crystal shared that, you know, the rights of nature are also human rights, but when do the rights of humans conflict with the rights of other beings?
I mean, to me, I don't really think there is a conflict. The only point that it gets to conflicting is when you think that a right of a human it also entails like financial you know, gain. So that's the only way that I can see like fighting for our natural relatives' rights will impede it on a like a human right if it was, you know, to hurt them financially. Because in court, obviously, in order to have standing, you need to prove that you can be hurt physically or financially. So that would really be my only premise of thinking. Obviously, I'm on the, you know, younger side, so I don't know necessarily legality, how far that might go as far as like property law and things like that. But within our instance, it's like, as you know, Crystal was saying, that it really is a human right. Like, we are relatives. We, as our grandma Casey says, we aren't humans defending nature. We are nature defending itself. So really, like, that is within our human rights, is our natural relatives. And I don't see really a cross in between, because what's going to hurt a natural relative is circumstantially going to hurt you as a human, whether it be today, tomorrow, or, you know, 7 years from now or 100 years from now. Whatever harm that is being done to those natural beings is going to ultimately hurt us as a human being, individually and as a collective. So I don't believe there is a cross or conflict when it comes to that. And if we're looking at natural relatives as basically an extension of ourselves, as our kin, as our family, then there isn't a argument to stand on as far as us crossing or hurting each other.
Thank you. And I was wondering if you could maybe share any conversations that your youth have had on this topic. And if you could also share an example of some of the ways that you assist them in cultivating that understanding or revitalizing these relationships that you're talking about.
So I guess offering different programming, like just looking at our traditional skills and kind of trying to revitalize that and saying like, okay, well, where does this come into play? And like, what culture keeper will work good with this youth, and kind of really just like giving a space, or opening the space for these conversations to happen is really how we develop these ideas and conversations and inspiration for our kids. I will say too, a lot of what keeps the youth going not only is like these stories from our elders and our culture keepers, but it's really connecting them with other youth. So all of, anytime we travel or any circumstance that we're in, it's really important for our kids to connect with the other Indigenous youth or just youth within this kind of combat of climate crisis, sort of like pools, they learn from each other. They get inspired by each other after any sort of, because we get shuffled around a lot to do, conversations and speaking engagements, because they're one of the few youth groups that is within this movement right now, because there's a lot of legal work that's involved with it. So a lot of our, myself and one of our other youth advisors really handles the depths of the legal work, and they're really there to like advocate and promote and just do, to be out in the water, to be out in the woods and things like that. But kind of lost my train of thought with that. But within that, they really do just want to, like, they learn from each other, they learn cultures from each other, but they also like, when we're at these, let's say like at these conferences, the one thing I'll be like, okay, well, what was your takeaway from today? And we do that every day after we're traveling somewhere, whenever we're interacting. And most of the time it's, when they are communicating with the other youth, or they're doing an activity with the youth, whether it's a craft or just learning, how to make one of their necklaces. When there isn't as much youth there and it's like panel discussion and it was just panels all day, they'll tell me about the panelists that talked about, the effects that kind of like the decimation of like whether it's a forest or the river had on them, like, or like that connection, like those little like quotes of like how they felt connected or why they feel connected within their natural relatives. That's what's really the youth are honing in on. So like, as I mentioned in my introduction, is, it's not like watching a movie and like getting inspired, or reading a book and getting inspired. It's like they legit feel it. So even when another Indigenous person, an Indigenous relative is speaking, about their fish, let's say like the sturgeon, that ignites something in them where they feel it. They don't just remember it. Like they feel what that is like. They feel that hurt. They feel, the also like that fire to do something about it. And that's really what inspired their whole movement to really come to do the, to do the youth group, is like, it means so much to us and there's so much work to be done. Like, how can we make this keep going for us and for the kids that are going to come up? So that's kind of just how we really kind of keep going, really offering different opportunities. And it's really not like, it's funny because my youth group for the NEA, they're like 15 to like 22. And then I also I work with tribal girls from like 10 to that age. And they're, they kind of want to like, they want to cook and stuff, or they'll want to like getting them off the res is a big thing for them. So like, I'll try and take them to shows or a play and stuff like that. So it's like, I have to kind of balance like that 1 foot in a shoe and 1 foot in a moccasin, and show them like the cultural side, but really like show them the world too. When it's like the older kids, it's like culture, like, because they know that they can't get it anywhere else. So it's very it's very interesting working across the generations and how like we really move them along. So now the younger, even though I'm just working with girls right now, they're still kind of like gearing up to be like those junior ambassadors and stuff. And I mean, as Krista was saying too, it's really women led. Like our men are super supportive and we need them in every way that we can, and we're really grateful for them. But our women are really taking on that role more now, with how much the world has changed and knowing that responsibility. So the young girls are really seeing it a lot more and feeling that obligation to kind of keep pushing forward. And it's really interesting and amazing to see how the boys are there for that support and to advocate. And it's not a combat. It's very much like putting up, our women on that pedestal and just kind of being there as that, like that strength that we need, because the women have been the strength for so long.
Thank you so
So
much.
it's kind of like returning to your tradition
Exactly.
as matrilineal tribes.
Mm-hmm.
I would just like to make a comment to that. I guess as tribal people, we see these keystone species that have supported these communities for thousands of years, and their annihilation, kind of like our annihilation. And we have to fight for them as well as fighting for ourselves, for our survival and for their survival. And training young people to maybe move back to that more traditional way of thinking, that doesn't include the extractive kind of rule of law and ownership of land and all of those kinds of tenets, but to look further into our tradition and think about these structures that we are now kind of recreating within that framework of the human right to have clean water, have clean air. And I think that's, I think that's where we're moving. And it reminds me of the seven fires prophecy about, in the seventh fire, man would make a decision between greed and the welfare of humankind. And so that's kind of where we are, I see. And I think we're leading the charge to get people to change their way of thinking than the colonialized version of what everybody's thought that the world was. And it's our responsibility as well.
Thank you, Chief Anne. And Crystal, I'd like to ask if you can add to this. And I'm just thinking actually of the work that Coda has been doing, someone who would like to actually work for the oceans and to study marine biology. And so can you speak to the work that you're doing with your own youth and how they are picking up this charge?
Right. So the one thing that we did last year that we probably will be doing again, is so we have our youth who are working on their river, like learning how to be working in a canoe in the rivers. And we actually taught them how to swim. This past summer, we did a whole grant with USA Swimming, got them able to swim because at the end of it, we were going to meet with some ocean voyagers from Maui. So we took a delegation of 7 youth and 5 elders to Maui to one of the gathering of the voyagers. And when they went to Hawaii to meet the youth, they saw how similar their concepts were about nature, but also connecting back to the water. And it's not that really much of a difference between a river and an ocean, except the waves are just a little bit bigger. But really connecting them back to that water so they have that sense of place or that sense of pride of where they come from. And that has instilled a confidence. And I don't know if Talia has seen it, but we've seen a big boost in confidence of the youth to be able to speak their mind, understand what they're learning in school is sometimes not true, or it goes against the history of our people, and then actually telling the teachers that they were wrong, but also telling other children who don't know anything about our indigenous cultures because we're still continuously erased in the K through 12 education system. They're able to speak out. We had an environmental conference, and we invited Talia's youth to come down, and so we had this huge panel of youth speaking out about what they were doing. So like Coda's age, because Coda's in her 20s, all the way down to, I think Zoe was the youngest at no, not Zoe. Yeah, they were the youngest at 13, and talking about how they felt. So we're able to instill confidence, build them up, and then be happy with their culture and being able to have that sense of identity and place, which has been taken away from us for so long. So now they know that they're connected to these rivers in their community. So that was some things that we're doing in this year. We're still working towards that, but this year we're going to take our youth to the Ponca coming up in May. So Talia, I don't know if you're going, but we'll be bringing more youth out there to the Ponca.
And Crystal, if you could maybe just explain what the Ponca is for people.
Okay. So the Ponca, they are a Siouan group that's their homelands were in Nebraska, but they had their own Trail of Tears that they were marched from Nebraska down to Oklahoma. And so we're doing a gathering. It's the convening of the Four Winds. I think it's actually one of the final convenings of the Four Winds with Movement Rights, who also works on the rights of nature with Shannon and Grandma Casey. And so we're bringing our youth, and well, we're actually taking a whole delegation out there to understand what they're doing in their communities and seeing how similar it is back home. Again, just trying to instill this sense of identity, because we were colonized, 300 years before the West. So it really did a number on our people on the East Coast.
Right.
Thank you. And Frank, I haven't forgotten about you there. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on the necessity to equip more tribal members with both tribal legal skills and Western legal skills as part of this, youth movement leading the civil rights of humans and nature forward.
Sure. And, really listening to everybody else talk about this is the formula that you have to incorporate into your own culture and then be able to articulate the whys and the wherefores, the significance of what's going on, because people fail to really slow down enough to see and listen to those concepts. The rights of Mahnomen, when we put that together with Thomas and Mari, it was probably 3 or 4 kinds of approaches being combined into those 3 or 4 pages. And rights of Mahnomen, the wild rice, it is what we're talking about right now. But we also made sure to articulate in that same law, our tribal law, that tribal members themselves have a right to defend those resources on and off reservation. And that's what we're also talking about here. And so when we were battling with Line 3 in the state of Minnesota and those kinds of environmental destructive activities and trying to prevent more of them from going on in our environment, ultimately we were able to have, as far as I've heard from different people, because I didn't do all this stuff myself, there was a lot of people that helped me, but all the tribal members, and I'm not talking about just Chippewa or Ojibwe, however you like to call us, or Anishinaabe, but anybody who identified themselves, in a way that had some identification that you could point to as a tribal member, or even a Hawaiian, in one case, who were participating, they were using their indigenous rights to protect nature. And ultimately those cases where they were citing people for nuisance or illegal assembly, blocking, trespass, they criminalized a lot of what are normal civil rights. We were able to have those cases transferred to our tribal court and decided there instead of under the jurisdiction of the state. And when we did that, the courts, I think the tribal courts and the state courts, maybe even the federal courts in some ways, everybody's hoping there's going to be another mechanism because what we have doesn't work right now. And so it's an opportunity for that to happen. And so you could see in the decisions that were written by the tribal court judges as well, how to articulate their sovereign rights the way we don't always think of them as completely, as we're talking, to to protect the environment, to protect ourselves, and the way we would view our right, not just the obligation, but our right to property again, and defensive property. And so while I didn't get a chance to get so far down the road with another aspect of that, the concept of defensive property would be if you have guests at your house and your house is on fire, you have a right to defend your property, and they have a right to assist you as a friend. And even if they're not, the owner of the house, or if your car's on fire, if there's some other problem. And so we were looking to even go as far as to try to have non-tribal members included in the defense of our property as people assisting us. And when Mahnomen sued the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources in tribal court, Mahnomen was the first named plaintiff, but the next 5 were the elected tribal council members. And after that, it was water protectors who had already been charged, tribal water protectors who had been charged in the state court with trespass, with nuisance, with illegal. And as a result, and actually we had 2 non-tribal members included who had been charged, who we had been working with for a long time. Because if you don't start initiating those kinds of conversations and showing that these people have the same rights, and they have a right to not be prosecuted for defending other people's property that maybe the state doesn't like, but are federally protected rights otherwise, it creates a different battlefield, or levels the battlefield, I guess, better. Because right now we can defend ourselves to some degree and in different places, but really we shouldn't have to, but I mean, we do. We should be able to defend other people as well for helping us defend our rights, and that they're not doing anything criminal. Whether we look at it as a necessity defense for clean air and clean water as 2 basic civil right concepts, I think that's without saying, I guess. So when I look at the blend of the tool to prevent tribal members from having a conviction in the state law for defending their own natural obligations and property, that was quite the trick in itself, because there was probably 30 or 40 water protectors that were tribal members out of the probably 1,000 cases, and many of them had 3 or 4 charges in multiple counties. So eventually you would try to put people, or I should say they would try to put people in jail for that. So, it's an interesting way to look at your relationships, and to, in some ways, to have Mahnomen protect us while we're trying to protect it.
I really like that. And I know Levi Brown has spoken a lot about these particular cases and how these laws actually have assisted tribes to sort of enact what is supposed to be inherent sovereignty in the first place, right? Or supposed to be written in a treaty, but is not enforced, or has not been allowed to be enforced. And so that actually leads me to my next question, but I'm going to change it a little bit. So the elephant in the room, I think, is what's wrong with environmental rights in the first place, right? So why the need to move beyond environmental rights? Because why is what we have not working for us? So that's the first question. And then the second question I'll open up to yourself and everyone else, is how do the rights of nature support in very practical ways Indigenous sovereignty on the level of Native nations who see themselves as sovereign nations?
Are we starting back with Frank?
Okay. Yes, well, first I'd love your legal opinion on, what's wrong with environmental law that we are sort of have to come up with another mechanism.
Sure. Well, it's been co-opted by the capitalist system that extracts all of our natural resources and leaves pollution and other damage everywhere it goes. And one of the things that I've learned over time from Thomas is, when you talk about words like, or terms like, the Environmental Protection Agency, sounds really good. They're an environmental permitting agency to be destroyed, and they just hope that you don't blow it. But unfortunately, it's somewhere along the line it happens. The same with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. They're permitting agencies for people who want to do things that are more risky than the average person would consider. When I think about those kinds of concepts, it's environmental laws aren't protective. I've tried to use those protective laws here and there, and I've noticed how other attorneys have used them also. Minnesota has a number of nice environmental laws, but you have to do it in their court, and you have to go through their process, and ultimately you end up with something that's not going to get you where you're trying to get to. And in tribal court, you don't have to explain anything to any of the tribal judges or anybody else about what's going on. When we were doing the rights of nature case, the Monoman case, that became a primary case for that tribal court to take care of these things right away and step in. And the judge was glad to have a role from a tribal court perspective in what was going on. And I think it's going to become more of that, in the sense that you can't change federal or state law very quickly. The people that are in control of it, I mean, we're watching some unreal, I don't know what the right term is, behavior by Congress that is so unrelenting that you don't know what to rely on. You don't know if they even breathe clean air or drink clean water, or if they, anything anymore. It's to rely on the mechanisms, I think, is almost like, what do they call that? Let me think of the right way to say that here. Doing the same thing again over and over and expecting a different result. And that by itself, I think, is what made me look at trying to find a different way to do it. And it took a long time. It took a lot of reading. It took a lot of thinking. It took a lot of talking to other people. And then you had to be that crazy person who was going to launch this litigation in a world that thinks it's not even a real thing, in the state sense. They don't look at our culture as something that's of value or of value to the world that we live in. And you think that maybe this, we'll see where it goes. But then you find out that the federal courts respect tribal courts, and they want the tribes under sovereignty to have the first chance to examine their own jurisdiction and to see what their rights are under their laws and to see how to apply those. And that gives tribes the opportunity to develop their own court record and their own exploration of what they're trying to protect, what kind of hearings you want to have in court. You can start having the whole tribal court, in a sense, start working on your issue day after day, instead of having a hearing for 4 hours and scheduling it for another day and trying to work through court and file all these papers. You can work on the process in a way that isn't taxing. When they talk about Occupy these different places in New York or Oregon or wherever, they persuaded those people to leave their camps and to take up their cases in the courts. And as soon as they did, those Occupy places disappeared, and you don't hear any more about it because you're in the environment that is set up for other people to prevail, almost blindly and automatically. So there's a bunch of reasons to have something else. It's just hard to figure out what that something else is. But having tried to figure these things out and go to law school and try to figure out why things are goofy in Indian country and goofy in the main world, you see that laws aren't real. And I shouldn't say it that way, maybe exactly, but wild rice, one of the things I learned about was civil forfeiture, and they refer to these
I'll remember. It's a concept of law. It's a legal fictions. Legal fictions is what, and they make laws that aren't exactly real. So they could take your car away from you if you had too many drinking and driving throughout the state. On reservation, if you don't have civil regulatory jurisdiction, my challenge to see how they could take it from tribal members. And so what I learned was that there was too much excessive punishment for people when they had a drinking problem, because it's a weakness, and they lose their car, they lose their family, they lose their house, they lose their job, and it's a punishment. And so they came up with this legal fiction to still take your car away. And that showed me that it didn't matter that I was creating rights of monoman for wild rice, because it's real, at least to me and a bunch of other people, but it's not legal fiction. And corporate law is considered legal, but it's a fiction of law. My clients are alive. So when you start looking at the systems blind you because they've existed for so long, and they make you think that's what your road is. But you change the road. You have to change it somehow, or you're just going to wake up the next day and do the same thing and wonder why.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay, that wasn't too long around the mountain.
No, not at all. Thank you so much. And it just reminds me that in the early days of arguing for the rights of nature, when courts said, well, nature can't speak for itself, so how can nature have rights? Lawyers pointed to corporations and said, well, corporations can't speak either, but they have rights. And so in some ways, the rights of nature is an antidote to the challenges we face that have been afforded to corporations. And so what you're explaining is the mechanism that exists for the rights of nature to function in the same way that rights of corporations have been allowed to function. And with that, I'd like to ask Chief Anne if you can follow on from what Frank said, just in terms of commenting about why the rights of the Rappahannock River is in your constitution specifically, right? So talking about this using different legal mechanisms, and it's not only that you've recognized the rights of the Rappahannock, but it's in your tribal constitution. What's the significance of that?
Well, I think it gives it a stronger position. And so in the tribal constitution, it states that the river is our mother, and she nurtures us with clean water and food and medicines for the well-being of our tribe and the health of our tribe. So that's kind of a construct of who she is. She's present. She is an individual who provides all of these things for us, for the survival of our people. And so putting it in the Constitution and then undergirding it with codes that will be litigated in our courts. As Frank said, you don't have to tell the judges already about who she is, because they already know, right? And so it gives you the opportunity to use this mechanism to protect your river from degradation and destruction.
Thank you. And I know, Crystal, you had your hand raised as well.
Yes, I just want to say that when these environmental rights are framed, they just center human use and not the Earth's inherent value. And the framework, that framework continues to treat nature as a resource. And then the thing that I come up against is the regulatory systems, even state and federal. These systems often fail, right? These environmental rights usually get enforced through regulatory laws, permits, thresholds, compliance, whatever, environmental impact statements. But the problem is these systems often legalize harm. So what I really just don't understand is a corporation can pollute up to a legal limit, and as long as they have a permit, it's allowed. But I'm just like, dude, do you really want to drink, 6 PFAS? Like, wouldn't 0 PFAS be better? But again, um, you know, they care about paperwork. But then again, like I talked about earlier, it separates people from nature. And then policies that might protect a wetland, but they ignored the cultural, spiritual, and ceremonial ties that the people have to that place. And then even sometimes those policies are top down, right? They're not rooted in local lived knowledge or experience of people who have lived in that ecosystem for thousands of years, generations. And they're also reactive. They're not proactive. Like, many environmental rights really come into play after a damage has occurred, like a pipeline has exploded or it has leaked or the river has PFAS in it. Um, using the rights of nature allows communities to act before harm happens, right? Because the land has been recognized as having, standing in court. So, that's why we're pushing so hard for that approach. And then the rights of nature approach is more healing, and it aligns with indigenous worldviews, where relationships, reciprocity, responsibility are the core. And it gives communities, like, not governments, but communities, the real tools that have, these communities have been silenced. So yeah, that's what I was wanting to say.
Thank you, Crystal. I really appreciate that. And you're also, what each of you have said here is really making me realize too that this is deeply contextual, right? From continent to continent, depending on the nation state we're talking about, and depending on the ways in which they implement laws. And I'm just thinking about the distinction between Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the United States of America. And so they're, in some ways, they're not comparable, right? And so the reasons why you might be wanting to utilize the mechanism of the rights of nature from an Indigenous worldview, they're the same as what the Maori are doing in Aotearoa, but from a perspective of combating ineffective laws, there might be a really nuanced distinction here at play. I just want to see if Talia has anything that she would like to add here.
Honestly, not really. Everyone, everything that everyone was saying is super, just kind of like, oh, yep, kind of like was putting stuff like light bulbs in my head of, yeah, I was gonna say add that. So I mean, I think the panelists really kind of covered that portion of the of what the last question was.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to sort of lead us into our very last question here, and I'm going to return back to something you sort of said in passing, Talia, when you spoke about the work that you're doing internally with your youth, but also the need to educate non-Indigenous members that are either aligned with your community or live next to your community, and getting them on board with the rights of nature. And so I'd like to ask you and then Crystal to speak to that work, the work of working across cultures and across communities, for the greater good of an ecosystem and your cultural heritage.
Yeah, so what I was saying, I mean, I guess as indigenous people, we're leading the conversation, because it's obviously within our value system, and it's a little bit contrary to, the Western value system, but also within our creation stories. I think it's been told, at least within our people, that, that this is the time that not only would it be time for the Indigenous people to actually really speak their voice loud, but it's the time that non-natives have the ability to listen and to retain. So we know that within our oral history, as far as like the 7th generation and where we're at within that right now. So that's why I think even us telling the youth that, it really empowers them to feel like they do have a say in what we're doing. So it's really just, you know, pushing that narrative as far as like we are the leaders and it's time for us to use our voice, because within our culture we do have a, you know, a humbleness about us, and a sense of gratitude that, you know, in not speaking in front of elders and really listening and stuff. So it's a different perspective for our youth, but I think because we have that within our oral history, that it's giving them that strength to, you know, use their voice. But as I say, in many of our educational kind of events that we do with non-native folks, it's, you know, we can do what we want. We can put whatever law we want within our sovereign nation and our system, but without that buy-in, as we say, without that knowledge and without that acceptance and really believing in it, we won't go anywhere. You know, like we really, it's, you know, like a restraining order. It's a piece of paper, but it's not going to stop, you know, someone from harming you. So it's the same essence within the rights of nature law. We can create the laws within our sovereign nation and know our value system and keep kind of living within our community, within our value system, like we have been, in order to stay protected from colonization for so long. But because we're at that point within the seventh generation and Mother Earth and, you know, Grandfather Sky and all of our natural relatives involved are at that place to say, nope, it's not. It's time for you guys to push out of that comfort zone. It's time for you guys to speak on our behalf. That's, you know, really what ignites us to keep going. And it really, like I said, it really has to have that understanding and that buy-in, as we call it. With us, we have that next step after putting the rights of nature legislation into effect within our nation with, you know, bringing a compact up to our state for them to recognize us as the legal guardians. So that's like our extra step. And for like the kind of general community to like enforce the buy-in, I guess, per se. But it really, without this education, and we really learned it, you know, from the people that we've met along the way within Seven Directions and movement rights, of how important, you know, the education portion of rights of nature is. Because even when we first kind of started talking about rights of nature within our communities, like, I don't know if it's just like the American psyche of what Native Americans are and spirituality and religion and stuff, like it was very like, I don't know, I think they were just so caught up on a stereotype of something that they didn't understand, that when we meant like rights, it was human rights, it was a law, it was legal, it's not a spirituality essence, you know, sort of like rites of passage situation. Like they were confusing RITS with RIGHTS. So even just like that, like getting past that, getting past stereotypes, getting past that psyche, and really talking, like having Indigenous leaders and youth talk to, you know, just even like climate workers or people within natural resources and lobbyists and politicians in a language that they speak, you know. So it's really that translation, and it's like, yes, it's our value and we can say that, but we can say it in your language, and this is how we're saying it in your language. So it's really like putting it right in front of, you know, their faces, as far as this is like, stop overcomplicating it. You know, it doesn't need to be this like fictitious thing because we're Native Americans and you've only met one in your life, you know. It's this actual substance thing that we truly believe in, and our leaders, our youth, are really igniting that and carrying it along the way. And it's really, and I will say, coming from, I guess, smaller mouths but loud voices, it's easier for non-natives to digest the information that is being said to them. So you know, if they see me or, you know, my sister Crystal come up there and like saying, hey, stop doing this because it's what's wrong, they're gonna see, you know, maybe a radical kind of angry Indian woman that's just kind of fighting. But if they see, you know, our kids and they're saying these stories and they're saying, oh, we need to do this and we're facing this, they're seeing the future, you know, they're seeing themselves per se when the youth are speaking. So it's so much more digestible, and it's really effective when it comes into education, especially when it's coming to educate a different cultural value system, you know, as the American values have been in that way for so long. And it's in peers with peers, you know, it's easier for them to retain it because it's like, you know, someone that sits next to them is talking to them about something that they really care about. So it's like the same thing if they were talking about like their hobby, if they were playing basketball or something. So it's kind of, it's not this like super hard concept, like, oh, I have to be a hippie to, you know, or a tree, you know, hug the trees and talk to the plants in order to believe in this. Like, no, it's the way that the kids are speaking, the way that we speak, it's ingrained within our value system, but it's a legal action, you know, and it's a method, it's a creative method to combat, you know, what the situation that we're in right now. But it's one of the most important parts of this movement is the education within, you know, my tribe and with how we're attacking rights of nature. It's part of the most important part, because the most important part is the youth and really instilling those values and that culture and knowledge within that youth. But that next tier is that overall acceptance and really pushing, you know, that seat at the table too, because so many times things happen within our homelands that we don't have a say in. So, you know, pushing that tribal consultation in any way that looks has been key within this. So, you know, our kids have actually, them speaking more about rights of nature and what they believe in has opened up that seat at the table, you know, for our natural resource department, for people like myself to come in, to sit down, because, you know, we actually applied and partnered with a water rights group in order to get funding to reconstruct our herring run. So the fish ladder that is not appealing and it's not cohesive with their journey, we partnered, you know, in order to get the funding to do so. So now, like, because we got the funding with another NGO, an organization, they're kind of that conduit with the town. So they're like that buffer, but it's like forcing us at the table together with the people that are making these actual decisions. So it's not even like we didn't necessarily just get the funding on our own, and that NGO didn't just get the funding on their own, and the town didn't get the funding on their own. It's like us that believed in this, you know, came together to apply for the funding. We attained the funding. So now we're forcing the town, who has the kind of authority at their hands right now, per se, to do something about it. So it's starting so much more. It's much further than just like creating the law and having it. It's teaching people what it is, like what rights of nature is, why it's important, but why, you know, the indigenous people of that land need that seat at that table when it comes to these conversations within, because of what they believe in, or what we believe in, I should say. And with that traditional ecological knowledge, like, we weren't the people that created the problems, and we don't believe that the people that created the problems are going to have the answers to solve them. We witnessed, you know, what it was like before colonization to what has happened through colonization. So there's all of that history and knowledge, that traditional ecological knowledge that we attain, that comes from each indigenous person, that is needed at that table when it's coming to make these decisions, because it was in my lifetime that they created that fish ladder, which was what the 1900s, like the kids say, it was 1990s. It's so funny when they say it, because they act like it was so long ago. But really, we know that wasn't that long ago, but how much it has hurt our herring in that ecosystem just from that, 30-something year mark is crucial. And it just proves how important it was and is to have had that indigenous perspective and consultation at that time when they were constructing those runs, so that it's completely necessary when we're talking about the conversation to solve the problem, that the indigenous people have that seat at the table to offer that.
Thank you, Talia. I appreciate that. And Crystal, I want to make sure that you have your last say, because I know you have to leave soon to join the seat at the table at the United Nations Permanent Forum.
Talia said it really good. You know, we're building these, we're working across cultures and ecosystems, right? And honoring the diverse ways of people, how each of these people relate to land and water, and building unity. That's the one thing that we're doing, and how we protect them. So it's, again, every mountain, river, lake holds a different story. And it's also about relationship building. And then, you know, again, you have to create these rural and urban allies, especially out here. We are pretty rural. So we need to co-create protections rooted in ancestral knowledge that Talia was talking about. And, you know, it just isn't a legal fight. Again, it's a cultural renewal, and that education piece is huge. It requires listening across worldviews and building trust and making sure the people closest to the land have those values that is indigenous, you know, rooted in indigenous value. And then also, people are not just consulted, but they're leading, right, in these you know, consultation practices. And then just, you know, having people act as guardians, like really getting back to your root of your life, you know. Um, we're just not adding indigenous knowledge to existing law. We are rebuilding law from a place where indigenous knowledge is primary. So yeah, like Talia said, everything is indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, because we're not basing it on ownership, like land is property, nature is a resource. We're basing it on relationships and kinship. So yeah, that's all I got to say. And you know what? I am going to hop off here because I've got to get dressed. And I just want to say thank you all so much for allowing me to be in this cohort and talking to everybody. And just being on this call with all of you. I've learned so much.
Thank you, Crystal, so much for joining us.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it, particularly whilst you're traveling and doing the work. Yeah.
So yeah, so I will let you know that after I finish this legal course at the University of Oklahoma, Master of Legal, I'm going to go back to the University of Arizona and I'm going to work on my law degree. So I'm so excited.
All right.
Working on environmental. That's going to be my thing, environmental stuff. So Alewa, you guys, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Crystal. So I'll ask Chief Anne and Frank if you have any last comments before we close here this afternoon.
I just would like to say that I've been so inspired by Talia and Crystal in this next generation, and I'm really looking forward to working with that generation because they have a lot of energy and they have a strong sense of identity around the sovereignty of their nations, and I think they're going to be our water protectors of the future.
Yep. Well said. Well said. I agree. I don't know what to really add to that, really.
No need to add anything. So yeah, once again, thank you so much, Talia, Chief Anne, and Frank for joining us. I really do appreciate you making time to speak to our community, because in a sense, this is the work of education, right? What we
Yes.
are doing here today is we are introducing this conversation to our community. We're raising awareness and sort of lighting some sparks for inquiring minds who would like to join this movement and who would like to support these efforts. So I appreciate your presence here all this evening. And that concludes our second day of our Religion and Ecology Summit. So I'd also like to thank all the attendees who've been here with us throughout the day and who participated in this morning's panels. And yeah, I hope you all have a good evening further. Charlie, is there anything you would like to say?
No, thank you. I think you summed it up perfectly, Chantel. And thank you to all of our panelists here, Chief Anne, Talia, Frank. Really greatly appreciate you being here. So just with deep gratitude, thank you for sharing and allowing us to listen. So I think that's probably the best way to leave it. And yeah, all the best moving forward in your own work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much for the opportunity.
All right.
Thank you, Chantel. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.